is Teresita Schaefer. She's the director of the South Asia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington and the American ambassador to Sri Lanka from 1992 to 1995. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
There appears to be some positive movement on the peace front in Sri Lanka. Is that the way you read it?
Yes, it is, and it comes against an interesting background. As you know, the Sri Lankans had parliamentary elections in December. The party of President Chandrika Kumaratunga lost, so that while she carries on as president, she still has another 4 years to run on her term. There is now a prime minister and a government of the opposite party. And it is this change of government that has led to a serious effort to get the peace process relaunched.
If those peace talks get underway, what are the chances that it will actually lead to the end of the war?
The chances that it will lead to the end of the war anytime soon are very poor. But I think you have a decent chance that it will lead to a process that is serious and that could eventually take you there. This will not be an easy process for all kinds of reasons, but think about the fact that there's never been a peace process that did its work in months. It's always been measured in years.
The new prime minister moved quite quickly on this issue. Has he eclipsed the role of the president?
That's an interesting question. The new prime minister, first of all, is a guy that's primarily interested in improving the Sri Lankan economy. But secondly, he has recognized for a long time that the big issue hanging over Sri Lanka, economically and politically, is the ethnic conflict. I think he also feels that time is not on his side. He knows that the president can, a year after the elections, once again dissolve Parliament if she feels that she could get her majority back.
Did the events of September the 11th, the attacks in the United States, have any impact on this situation?
It did, but I would say less than you might think. I think it's affected the outlook of the LTTE, which sees other groups that have used terrorism being battered by the American military, and which sees a very different international climate from the one that prevailed before September the 11th. I think initially the attacks on the U.S. awakened some hopes in Sri Lanka that perhaps the LTTE would become a direct target of U.S. wrath. What you've seen since then suggests that that was at best premature. But I think that it has shifted the balance a bit in favor of the government. Now, the government still has a major disadvantage in that it has never been able to have a decisive military victory over the LTTE. And the LTTE is a very determined and hard-bitten opponent. They are totally mistrustful of the government and really quite dedicated to their goal of getting a separate state. So this is still a very difficult task. Finding common ground between them will be extraordinarily difficult.
How would you compare the situation in Sri Lanka today as opposed to the early 90s when you were ambassador there?
Well, first of all, it is more fluid today than it was in the early 90s. In the early 90s, you had a period in which whatever else happened, the map didn't change. There was, between 1990 and 1995, there was essentially no change in the pattern of who controlled what territory. Secondly, politically, between 1990 and there I would say 1994, there was no political breakthrough. The one political breakthrough that did take place after that time, when the present president took office in 1994, was a very courageous peace effort, but it unfortunately was not successful. And the fact that it got bogged down meant that the government's statesmanlike peace proposals also started to look like losers. At the moment, you have a more fluid political situation within mainstream Sri Lanka. You have this enforced cohabitation in the government, with the two principal characters being people to whom cohabitation does not come naturally. But you also have the experience of a relatively recent serious negotiating effort, serious at least on the part of the government. And that has, I think, to some extent, awakened a peace constituency in Sri Lanka and awakened the hope that maybe things can work.
If there was peace in Sri Lanka, what would you see for the future of the place?
Well, if there was peace, you have to make some assumptions about what kind of peace. The big thing about Sri Lanka is that this is a country which did a lot of important things right. Everybody goes to school. Overwhelming majorities of babies survive into childhood and into adulthood. These really basic statistics distinguish Sri Lanka from most of Asia and from most of the developing world. So if they had peace and were able to get their politics under control, you have the groundwork laid for a really tremendous increase in prosperity and dynamism in a country that I really think deserved better, but has never been able to take advantage of the good things it did on the human side.
Thank you for this.
You're very welcome.